All right, this will be it for the introduction to bargaining theory as an approach to understanding crisis bargaining situations. We have defined what bargaining is, and specifically what crisis bargaining is. It's a bargaining situation with a sizable difference between having an agreement and having no agreement. So the situation is politically important, it matters. And second, crisis situations are typical by the reversion point. So the situation when the negotiations break down and that when no agreement is reached is dynamically worsening off. Now, in this very last short segment of the introduction, I will give you a couple of practical pieces of advice for your negotiations, basically summarizing what I have mentioned so far and going a bit further on some points. The first key advice any negotiation analyst gives you before you start negotiations is that you define your goals very well. You need to understand what your goals in the interaction are. Specifically, you should know what your ultimate goals are, not immediate goals that you may think of, like building a coalition with certain actor and so on. No, define what you actually want to achieve. Right? Based on this, we will be able to define intermediate goals, which are themselves essentially just means for the ultimate goals. But it's a big mistake during the negotiations, and it can happen quite easily, to substitute the intermediate goals, which are really a little more than means for the ultimate goals, which can be, for instance, prevention of the breakout of war or something like that. So never substitute means or intermediate strategic goals for ultimate goals that truly reflect your underlying preferences. So be mindful of what your interests are in the crisis bargaining. It is not a good idea in a bargaining situation to take as your ultimate goal to beat the others. Because of course, if the others do take this position as well, then automatically, even before your negotiations start, they are doomed to fail. Once you define your goals, think about your means. Think about the tools that you have available. Think about how you can develop your outside options, how you can develop your inside options. Make yourself patient, or at least make yourself appear patient. In crisis situation, which is again specific by that the reversion point is worsening off, it's dynamically getting worse and worse, you at least should think about whether you can make yourself appear just a bit more patient than the others are. Bluff, if you can, about your resolve and about your power. Try to convince the others that you are more resolved, that you are more attached to your position than you truly are. You shouldn't overdo this, of course, but this can be a useful source of leverage in the bargaining. Finally, think about possible commitment tactics and their use for your purposes. Now, this is the typical advice that you can easily read or that you can easily get from any introduction to bargaining theory. But there is one caveat, a big caveat. Understand that the others, that your partners are not stupid, that they are doing the same. You need to understand that you are not the only person in the room who is smart and who is trying to get as much as possible from the negotiations. Now, if you overdo it, if you try to outsmart others too much, and you meet with resistance from their side, you may end up with a complete breakdown of the negotiations, which especially in crisis situations means that you have lost. In crisis bargaining, failing to reach an agreement is typically worse than getting at least some deal, even though not the best deal, at least some deal. So being too smart may mean that you miss a window of opportunity and that you actually end up losing on your core targets, right? You might have not gotten beaten by your partner or by your opponent rather in the bargaining setup, but how does it matter if you have anyway lost and failed to deal with the crisis, which is the reason why you're incurring further costs maybe for many years to come. So be careful there. In crisis, finally, being patient, what I've mentioned previously as a source of bargaining leverage, may mean that you will end up with no deal at all. So again, be careful about trying to be too strategic as long as you are the only person in the room who is strategic and smart, you may be fine. The problem is when you end up with an opponent who is equally smart or even smarter than you, then you may just both end up with empty hands. On a more positive note, I would say a good way to start negotiations is to keep one's mind open, to try to know to make sure that you know very well what you want, but also try to know what the others want, what your partners want, what they really want, not what their strategic postures in the negotiations might be, but what they actually want, what are the true things that they are seeking. Try to know, to get to know how serious they are about their positions, about the individual aspects of their positions, where they might be willing to offer concessions in exchange for other things that you might yourself not care that much about, right? So getting important things, giving up on unimportant things. This is, of course, the recipe for success, for successful negotiations. And finally, if you can, if you want to communicate to the others your positions, your resolve, try to find means of credible communication. Okay, this is it from this introduction to bargaining theory, very briefly, of course. I wish you the best of luck during the simulation. My colleagues will add more input to you in this online session as well. Personally, I'm so much looking forward to observing you during the simulation and seeing how you apply these things that I have just mentioned and that you will read about as well in your preparation for the session. So good luck and see you.